We're going to hear about communicating cyber to non-technical folks.
So this panel is about the discussion of marketing. And one of the things that I think of that come to mind when I think of marketing is that it's the art of persuasion. And really what it comes down to in the world of IT and cybersecurity is communicating the risk management with the elected officials and the stakeholders that are managing that data in your county. And today's panel includes Glenn Markey, the CIO for Dutchess County, New York. And we also have Kim Biddings with BioKey.
I paid him to do that.
Nice.
Yeah.
We have Justin Luce with the CIO from Berks County, Pennsylvania, and Serge Jorgensen from Silent Group. So I will turn it over to them to go over how they do the marketing.
So yeah, Kimberly Biddings from BioKey. I'm in marketing. It's a secret, I just told you, but also know cybersecurity for over a decade. And really this first part that we want to highlight is that we're talking about marketing because it's about communication, right? A lot of times, and I actually was just talking to Mark Levine from NYSAC, and saying, you know, we eat, sleep, breathe. If you're a tech person, we speak in acronyms, we speak in risk, you know, multi-factor authentication. I can't tell you what a lot of people think that acronym stands for. That's not in IT. But it's really important that we communicate effectively to everybody across counties, right? And it's really everybody's responsibility. And so we started talking more about how do you construct effective communication. So the first thing I'll do is go through 5 tips for effective communication. This is literally Marketing 101, so you'll get a crash course in it. And then Glenn has a perfect example. I'm getting fixed. Thank you. I bet everybody could hear me though. And then Glenn has a great example that they've done actually across New York for effective communication in terms of cybersecurity to county leaders. So as you can see on the screen, there's 5 tips that if any communication, and by the way, if you want to communicate effectively to your family members about something, this applies across the board. But it's really important to build out these 5 key tips when you're thinking about communicating something that's technical to another audience. First and foremost is know your goals and what's success for you. So for example, if I'm communicating and trying to get funding approval for my Active Directory migration project, it's very important that you know what goal you're trying to get. That's funding, right? Whereas versus in a crisis environment, you want to make sure that you understand what the outcome is for that crisis environment. So knowing what your goal is going in, knowing how you define success is very, very important. The second tip, and I almost reordered these because I think this is actually more important, is that you have to know your audience. You have to know your audience. You have to also get to know them deeper than this is the county commissioner that I work with. And that means understanding what motivates that person, understanding the emotional connection they have to what you're probably about to tell them, right? So a lot of times we go into things and we talk about what and how, right? I'm gonna implement multi-factor authentication and this is what it is. This is using a password and a badge tap. Instead of getting to the emotive connection about what motivates that person in the end of their day and in their day-to-day lives. And the best way to do that is to survey, take them out to lunch, right? Get to know people very intimately to know what motivates them. And so that ties to tip 3, which is then construct the message that you're about to send around that why. And so a great example is back to that multi-factor example. I worked with a county actually rolling it out. And the first email that they had drafted said, we are rolling out multi-factor authentication on July 1st. It's going to be very critical. It's very important. And instead, we spun it to say, it's your responsibility to help us keep your county safe and protected and protect our residents. Because that's going to hit on the emotive component of cybersecurity for that person. And then you can get into the how and what you're going to be doing to get to that. But what matters to you as an IT professional Doesn't necessarily matter to the person that's receiving the communication. You have to know what motivates them, right? You have to know what motivates the person when you're going to ask for anything in terms of funding or support. The fourth one is clear call to action. So all the time, and we all do this, you'll ask somebody to do 5 things in an email, right? Like, I want you to respond to my email, give me advice, answer this question, right? There's so many things. And so when it's already a complex subject, you have to be very, very clear. And so a lot of times I say to break it apart, break it into 3, 4 different communications that every single one is extremely pointed on what you're asking them to do. And guess what? The first one may just be read these FAQs. Don't do anything yet. Don't implement anything yet. I just want you to learn a little bit more. And then the next communication, now I want you to click a link to just download or implement this, application. So again, break things apart. Don't ask people too many things in one communication because it's overwhelming to begin with. The 5th thing is really omni-channel. That's what we call it, marketing. Use multiple methods of communication because we all learn differently. So one advice I have, hands down, best IT tip I can probably give you, if you just email people like crazy to do that implementation, right, to just keep doing things, or if you're trying to communicate a crisis, anything, one of the best things I've seen work is host open office hours. Have a Zoom link that people can come and ask you the questions on video or in person because people learn differently. Reading something as far as, I want you to do this, this is why it's emotively important to you, sometimes doesn't translate at all to that person. The other tip for that is if you have a 2-person IT team, you really don't want to be answering the same question 10 times via email. So if you're implementing something, if you're trying to get adoption, especially across a county, it's really, really important to have open office hours. They're all going to come and ask you the same question, but they also can learn from the same question that everybody's asking. Okay, so omni-channel, that's social, that's email, that's phone calls, on-call, Zoom calls, anything you can think of. So those are my 5 tips, my marketing 101. You've just gotten a crash course. You're all experts in making campaigns. You can, sell things to people. But I'm actually going to turn it over to Glenn because Glenn, as I said, has done a phenomenal job across New York, really actually implementing these 5 steps in a very digestible way for county leaders.
Yeah. Okay. So to your points on effective communication, one that Kim talked about is know your audience. And so what New York State did is they met with a random sample of local leaders, mayors, town supervisors, leaders, department heads, county executives, and they asked them a series of questions to really understand, what is it about cybersecurity what don't you know about cyber? What do you want to learn about it? You tell us where you are with cyber. So based on that and some surveys that were conducted by the Center for Technology at the University of Albany in New York, and also the New York State Association of Counties, I do want to point out Mark Levin, if you can wait. There he is, Mark Levin. He's one of the committee members that helped put together this primer, cybersecurity primer for county leaders. So it's a very short guide that we put together as a committee. And Mark he's got enough for everyone here. We got over 200 copies. So feel free to grab one. If you can't get one from Mark, we'll have them outside on the NACo table. But what this guide does on communications is the primer is organized in 3 sections. One is why, and you heard Kim say why is one of the most important. And we kick off this first section. Why is cybersecurity important to you as a local leader? Why? So we give examples. I mean, the example we used was a real ransomware attack that happened in Shenango County, very small county, 48,000 citizens. It's in south central part of New York State. And, they felt, well, when we talked to the CIO and the county exec, why did they attack us? We only have 48,000 citizens. We're not big. And I had a conversation with Kim. She had an organization that said the same thing. Hey, I only support 12,000 citizens. Why? They're not coming after me, but they are. Okay, they're not just going after the big guns, but they're going after smaller counties and municipalities as well. So this county in Norwich is the county seat. They had a ransomware attack. And it caused so much havoc. Everyone had to get involved. New York State Information Technology Services, the state police, forensics labs. We had to go out to and contract some agencies to do the forensics for the county to find out exactly what was happening. But it really was an incident that caused so much havoc. They had to rebuild the network. They had to secure a large amount of new hardware and software. They had to migrate to Office 365 because it has some cybersecurity protections in it. Major disruption for months, many months. So that's why it's important. So we capture your attention with why. And then they asked for common terms and common tools and common solutions, things of that nature. So we have a whole section that answers all those questions for you. And in those common questions Q&A, we talk about a cyber program. What is a good cyber program? What are the components of a good cyber program? A lot of people, forget you really need a good business continuity plan or a continuity of operations plan. A lot of people kind of forget that. That's very important. And a disaster recovery plan. You've got to have the ability, like in this incident, ransomware, you have to have the ability to recover from the disaster. That's what, in my CIO for the county that I manage, that's one of the most important first steps that I do to protect against cybersecurity. You better have an effective disaster recovery plan and test it. Because you're going to get hit by somebody. Everybody, you see the numbers. We have pages in here that give you numbers. They're just amazing. How can we have so many of these attacks all the time? It's just a matter of time before you get hit hard. So be prepared. Be able to recover in a disaster. Have a very robust, resilient disaster recovery plan.
And I think, Glenn, like you said, the one thing you notice Glenn is doing is hitting on why, like you said. The way he got county leaders to read the rest of that document, and if you are a county leader, hopefully you're reading the rest of the document, is starting with the why, right? We have to show you an example of why this matters before you're going to go read what is cybersecurity and what is NIST and everything else. So it's a phenomenal start to the document to get that emotive connection like, wow, I really don't want that to be me. So.
Right, and also there are a lot of questions on, what are this? We don't even know what the cybersecurity laws are. What are the regulations? How about cybersecurity insurance? All that is addressed in here, and we give you references and links to get that information. This was looked over by the county attorney, so they know all the regulations. Most people don't know what they are. Okay. And then, as Kim indicated, frameworks. It's important that you have a framework. And so we give a recommendation on our framework. I'll talk about that on the last slide here.
And I would say your business speak is what you used around the framework, right? So and I'll go to your slide, but the NIST framework is a beautiful framework because it's in English.
Right, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's the framework that we recommended on the committee. It's very simple. It's just 5 areas. And your job as a leader is to make sure that all 5 of those areas are being addressed to mitigate the risk, okay? And we spell it out. We don't put the technical jargon here in this guide, so we hope you find it useful that way. But we explain what it means to you as a business leader: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. What you should be doing in each of those phases? What should you be doing as a leader to make sure that those areas are properly covered? So the NIST framework is one of many frameworks that you can select. That's the one that we recommend. And then Kim also talked about call for action. That sounds really
You like it,
important.
Glenn, I know, yeah.
Sounds like call for action. So here's what we wanted: actionable items for our county leaders to do when they left the meeting with us. And that was at least one of these three, one or all. One is identify what your cybersecurity framework is. We recommended in this framework, okay? And that's how you should build your discussions around cybersecurity in identifying, protecting, detecting, and so forth. Very important. You should go to you should ask your cyber administrator in your organization, hey, what framework? Show them you got your act together. Hey, what cybersecurity framework are you using? Geez, this is a business guy asking me this. See what he says. He better have one. Okay. 2 is draft a cybersecurity incident response plan. Very important. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Doesn't have to be big. Doesn't have to be a long document. There are many examples out there. We're happy to share our example with you. But it's very important you do that, because what the incident response plan does, that is your vehicle to communicate. We're talking about marketing communication. How is the incident response executive team going to respond to an incident? Because there will be one. It's just a matter, not a matter of, if, it's when. So get that document in place. Very important. And then lastly is conduct a tabletop exercise, cybersecurity tabletop exercise. Our county, we were the first out of the 62 New York counties. We were the first county that volunteered to do a tabletop exercise with the Division of Homeland Security Emergency Services out of New York State. They came into our Emergency Operations Center with their staff. We had the county executive there with his leadership team, all the department heads, all the commissioners, and they threw a series of ad hoc, because we had no idea what the incident was going to be. But and what we were able to do was test the incident response plan. Does this plan work? And it showed where we were weak and where we were strong, because we had to collaborate. We had a lot of the commissioners that were virtual, some were there on site. Depending on the scenario, the incident happening at the time, that's when we brought in the department head to take appropriate action. So very effective. When's the last time you communicated with everybody in your county? This exercise forced us to communicate and make decisions under pressure. Very important to do this. So build the incident response plan and schedule a tabletop exercise to test it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the last thing we'll say there too, that's omni-channel, right? Writing a business response plan or a disaster recovery plan and reading it is very different than someone experiencing it firsthand and learning it and taking it seriously. And so I think phenomenal example across New York State as to how they implemented effective communication and strategy and planning. Thanks, Glenn.
That really goes into one of the core concepts is, what is cybersecurity in general? Just before we can even communicate about cybersecurity, what is it? And that then becomes one of the questions that you face on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so one of the things that we run into all the time is, who owns this cybersecurity risk? We just heard from the Center for Digital Government that a lot of CIOs, as they're completing that digital county survey, are seeing cyber risk as one of the most important thing. But I wonder how many commissioners would really answer the same way. What we heard from President Johnson this morning is that county commissioners are faced with a lot of challenges. They're faced with food insecurity and suicide and opioid overdoses and homicide rates and things like that, other things that they're concerned about. So how do we rectify that, and how do we bring this together, and how do we get our priorities on the same page with them? And I think the answer to that is that we as IT directors, we don't own the risk. The business owns the risk, right? And I think we need to constantly drive that message home. And sometimes I think we're our worst enemies, because I think in an effort to be helpful and to do our part in trying to help further technology, help to mitigate those risks, I think a lot of times we take some of those things on our own. So I think what we need to do is we need to remember that, from that marketing perspective, people engage with, with marketing because they're dealing with somebody that they trust, they're dealing with somebody that they like, and because there's a benefit to them. So I think those are some of the three main takeaways that I see here. We need to develop that trust, and that trust comes sometimes at a high cost. It comes at a cost of additional projects and delivering on promises made. We have to be likable, and we have to engage in their business, and we have to, kind of put ourselves in their position and understand their role and their business processes. But more importantly, we need to connect with them, and we need to help them to understand that we're there to help them mitigate risk that they own, risk to their business, risk to their operations, and risk to their their own capital, their own human capital.
And I think it's at the risk of playing buzzword bingo. We can talk about zero trust and we can talk about MFA, but if we don't drill into that and we start with this dialogue and somebody reads Fortune magazine on the plane on the way back and goes, okay, I should be asking this about zero trust. And so then I go in and say, hey, do we have zero trust? And you say either yes or no or working on it or something, but we don't really know what that is. So multi-factor authentication for people that said, no, hey, I don't know what that is. It's just something that you have and something that you know. So I know what my password is and I have my phone and I combine those two and now I have multi-factor authentication. And that by virtue of having to have something and know something, even if I lose my password or somebody else knows my password, as long as they don't have my phone, they can't get into that resource. But I think that's exactly what you're talking about, in that you can explain the risk, you can talk about the risk, but both parties need to make sure that you're talking about the same language and then pushing that risk out to the business units. In terms of doing that, in terms of explaining that risk or discussing the risk, do you have any favorite analogies that you use or what's your favorite method? Because we can talk about, and Glenn, you're talking about those NIST concepts, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. We can say, here's the cybersecurity risk. We can say, here's the IT meaning of that NIST framework. But how do you do that to utilities or EMS or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's always about kind of putting it in context and trying to get something that someone will relate to personally. We just heard a great analogy in one of the earlier presentations, right? That analogy that they used that was most effective was about kind of saying, hey, we're trying to protect this data the same way that you would protect your bank account. So that's a great example there, right? And I think a lot of times, people that deal, if we have county departments that deal with healthcare, they understand that. They understand that they want their own personal healthcare records protected, and they can relate to, protecting county assets in the same way that they would want their bank account, their healthcare records, any of their personal information protected. But also, talk about their family. Maybe some people have very flippant attitudes about things like privacy and cybersecurity. But if you put that in context of their children or their wife, family members, husband, et cetera, sometimes that resonates a little bit more. So I think anytime we can try to put things in down-to-earth terms, it's beneficial.
I would chime in on that too. So one of the things I found very effective, so cyber risk is still pretty tech-focused, right? The ultimate outcome of cyber, by the way, is reputational damage. Does everybody understand what reputational damage is to your brand and to your county and to the security?
To the person,
To the person.
right? Yeah.
An example I'll give in healthcare, and it's appropriate if you have, obviously any EMS or any services like that. Patient mortality rate was actually a study done as a result of cyber incident. I care a lot about that. Right? So there are real world impacts. And we've had like Colonial Pipeline and some of these examples actually impact day-to-day citizens. But quantifying value is another marketing trick that says, well, you don't need to know about multi-factor, but what you do need to know is it's going to impact tens of thousands of citizens. This is the downtime they're going to experience. And for example, like in healthcare, your ER is shut down for 3 days. And that's, now we're hitting on emotion, we're hitting on why, and we're hitting on value that people actually full on experience and understand. So cyber is like an underlying concept that drives actually very substantial risk to everyday people. And that's why I'm passionate about it. And I think all of us are up here, why it matters. So.
But that's where finding those analogies are really important too, because it's invisible until it's not.
Right.
It's totally invisible. You're driving down the road. You're thinking about, holy cow, that was a huge pothole I just hit. Let me take a picture of that and send that to my commissioner. You're not thinking about, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be able to access my email from my kid's machine that they're playing World of Warcraft on without some sort of MFA in place. And you just trying to put it into real world analogies, but also finding some partners. And we just listed out a couple here, but favorite partners that Justin, Glenn, that you guys use and that you work with. And then while you're talking about that, if you could also go to that, back to that poll, and curious just how frequently you're meeting between IT, leadership, security, and maybe some of these other partners. Just give us some sense of if that's a frequent meeting or if that's a never meeting.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think when it comes to stakeholders, I think there's a couple of different schools of thought on this, right? In my opinion, my experience, especially when talking about something that's so big and confusing as cyber, it can't happen in just one direction, right? This is not something that is effective just coming down from the top. This is something that needs to come down from the top, and there needs to be supportive leadership, and there needs to be that engagement. There needs to be active dialogue with leadership. We need to do a better job of making the leadership and the commissioners feel the same way about cyber as we do, right? But it also needs to come bottom up, right? And you have to remember about how some of the leadership gets information about what's happening in the organization. This is something that we need to drive from the bottom as well. This is something that needs to come up in dialogues between department heads and folks like county commissioners when we're not in the room, right? And we need to make sure that we drive that. Some of the ways we do that, purchasing and procurement are great partners. They need to be partners on this. We need to partner with department heads. We need to partner with mid-level management. We need to partner with staff, right? I know this sounds like a panacea, but we've got to communicate at all those different levels. And then, ultimately, county leadership, we need to get the solicitor's office involved. We need to understand all those things that Glenn was talking about, that departments and business leaders understand some of those cybersecurity laws and regulations, the ones that we're aware of that maybe they're not, right? And then we need to think about our vendors too, right? So look for vendors that understand how this communication needs to happen. Look for vendors that can help kind of distill some of this complex language and help give you strategies about how to talk to other people at your organization.
And that some of that can be a force multiplier, because if you can get the audit team doing some of your marketing for you and pushing your message out there and explaining to business units why they need certain things. Audit understands risk, finance understands risk. So the more cross-disciplinary conversations that you can have really helps get everyone involved in the process. And certainly it's a favorite tactic of ours when we walk into an environment and we're trying to secure an environment, working not just with IT, but some of those other areas, because very frequently we'll ask the question, simple questions. Do you have MFA? I think Kimberly's favorite question there. And they say no, and then we'll say, okay, well, why not? And IT says, because the doctors won't let us put it in place because it's a health safety issue and somebody might die because they can't find their phone. Well, IT then has the technology, has the solution, has purchased the product, but just can't actually implement it and needs some help. So if we go enlarge on the risk, engage with some of the other communications, audit, those teams, they can help bridge those gaps and implement those solutions. So it's a very, very important and powerful solution. And for those of you that aren't meeting on a regular basis and just looking at the survey results there, 75% of you meeting frequently between IT leadership and security, which is fantastic. For those of you that aren't meeting that frequently, I would just say take that effort, put in that extra time. I know an hour is hard to find, but to just sit down with the teams and talk about what the projects are, make sure that you understand them. If you're not in IT, if IT and cybersecurity is not your native business, keep asking questions and keep asking for analogies so that you can actually figure out what that common language is.
I think there's a repetitive nature of this too. Like sometimes taking that simple message and repeating it in every meeting, every meeting I have with my leadership, cybersecurity is a topic there, talking about what we're doing. It may not be a lot, but sometimes just hearing that message over and over tends to become tremendously effective, right? Learning from some of that marketing that we all experience on a daily basis.
Yeah, I was going to say, I will re-emphasize that point. The most successful IT requests, projects, and everything else is one that has a business champion. If in the audience, you are one of those county officials, elected officials, county leaders, partner and champion an IT project. Like, that's incredibly powerful. And that's how things change, and that's how things get better. Those are the most successful projects, hand down. So.
And vice versa. If you're the CIO taking an active part and going to hunt down and search out those people and say, hey, how can technology help you do your business? I think way too often IT becomes that cost center, and no, you can't have that, and it's going to cost an extra couple $1 million for that extra petabyte of storage that you need, so not going to do it. And we end up pushing people to their P card and just, hey, I can buy this thing for $8 a month. I'm just going to have shadow IT. So that's where the marketing side of things can really help in those communication opportunities.
Absolutely.
So in trying to do that and trying to figure out how to communicate and maybe some common benchmarks and tools, wanted to share some ideas for some key performance indicators so that we can talk not about the health of IT, but rather the health of cybersecurity overall. And again, I'll turn to Justin, just some favorite KPIs, some ideas about KPIs, how you might put them in place.
Well, I think that this is an area where, I would love to dialogue with a bunch of you about how to best measure our cybersecurity efforts. Because I think a lot of times I think the metrics that we feel are important don't always resonate with the business. I mean, some of the ones that are no-brainers in my mind are those, kind of those phishing exercises, right? So we all know we've got great metrics in measuring our organization's susceptibility to things like phishing attacks. But I think typically there's other metrics that we're missing there. Like in most of the simulations that I've seen, there's a large percentage, actually the majority of those phishing simulations go unanswered at all. So people don't respond. And we don't really know for sure whether they don't respond because they recognize that it's something that's bad and they just don't click on it, or whether they just don't get to that email until after the simulation ends. Or, maybe it is really bad and they just don't get to that email that day because they're on vacation or busy or, don't get to it. And I think that when we think about metrics, we need to think about measuring things that align with action so we can communicate that. Again, pointing to the presentation that we had right before this one, so kudos to Rita for kind of stacking the presentations up. But, I think that a lot of us are doing very similar things on a number of fronts related to cybersecurity. And what makes a county great in their efforts is their ability to tell that story and align it with data. And I think that is the biggest message when it comes to cybersecurity, right? We need to pick out the area that we want to focus on, the thing that we think is going to resonate with the business, and we need to pick out metrics and data and use it in advancing a story that we want to tell. And sometimes that story is a motivational one, right? Where we need departments to get 100% participation in our phishing exercises, not just, having a large majority of people ignore it. And sometimes it's championing success, right? We've implemented MFA and now we have metrics behind how much of our organization is implemented. Or maybe it's also cautionary, right? So if working with, our partnership with Silent, sometimes we do exercises where we're intentionally trying to crack things like password hashes to identify weak passwords. Those are tremendously effective metrics for us because that's one of those two factors in MFA, and there are attacks aimed at MFA and things like MFA bombing. So we need to keep an eye on those, and we need to make sure that just in an effort to move to a newer technology, we're not forgetting about some of the other ones, some of the other safeguards that we have.
And a really interesting point.
And I think a lot of people are learning that by implementing MFA, it has a really positive impact on your cyber insurance. Your cyber insurance should go down. Your premium should go down. That's been a common observation we've seen with counties that are implementing multi-factor authentication. So is anyone experiencing that when they're implementing MFA? They know, good, your cyber insurance premiums went down?
Or you can't even
Or
get it
you can't get it without. That's right. Or you can't get it because you didn't implement MFA yet. Right. So it does have a lot of important implications.
And that's a business impact for anybody who's not in IT. If you don't understand multi-factor or what factors you're using, understand you can't get insurance or you're going to cost more. That's tangible business benefit right there.
And that's the value of the analogies as well, and finding analogies that work in order to have communication, in order to market what you're trying to do. In terms of retrofitting cybersecurity, I use an analogy sometimes of trying to retrofit cybersecurity into an application that's already been rolled out is like trying to put airbags and seatbelts in a car as you're going down the road at 80 miles an hour. Good luck. It's hard to do. So if you can come up with analogies like that so that we don't have to have this technical discussion about, well, that means that I'm going to have 2 hours of downtime and I don't know what the RTO and RPO are going to be and whatever, even IT people's eyes start glazing over at that point. So if you find a fun way to talk about it, it really allows you to communicate the intent a lot better. And you may not like the metrics. Justin was talking about something that we look at in terms of passwords that are shared or passwords that haven't been reset on accounts. The first time you do that analysis and you look and you go, holy cow, if a key performance indicator is supposed to be the age of my passwords on my Surface accounts, and the first time I have to share that metric, it's a wince because it's been 25 years since I've changed that account. Yikes. Well, that's a really good metric to start using because chances are it's not necessarily an IT password. It's because the PeopleSoft people or the mainframe team won't let you change the password because it's going to break JRE, but the password is JRE. Okay, give me that metric. Let me start socializing it, and it'll drive change because then I'll tell the accountants or the auditors, hey, here's a KPI. It looks ugly. Help me change it.
Absolutely. Again, I think that we need to be careful of using metrics that we have no control over unless we're using them to advance a story and put context around what's happening in the world. Like things like attacks on our firewall. That's a great metric, right? Because people, oh my gosh, we're being attacked. Like that's something that tends to resonate with leadership, but it's not something that we have control over. So if you're using that metric, make sure that you're using that to contextualize something that matters and something that's aligned with a motivation or something that you want to compel your organization to do, right? And then it can be really effective and it can really help. Because when you have metrics that if you're doing the right thing and your metrics take a downturn next month, next year, it can be really detrimental to your story, right? So, and really detrimental to what you're trying that marketing effort and what you're trying to do with telling your cybersecurity story and telling that journey.
And we've certainly looked at metrics that are used in the physical world specifics. So some of the ones, numbers of potholes and EMS response times and public works projects that are in progress. If that's what leadership is used to tracking, then trying to mirror those and develop similar types of KPIs and reporting works really well, because now people are used to looking at a dashboard and it makes sense to them of, okay, I'm trying to track this and this is important for me to look at, as opposed to trying to introduce some new technology, new terminology that may not make as much sense. If you can try to line those up, make it meaningful, raise that awareness. And then finally, I think we had that last question about tabletops. And I think it goes to Glenn's point about you should be doing a tabletop. It could be another metric that you use of what are the exercises we do for cybersecurity, how many of those have occurred, what the results are. But if you could just look back in there and give us an idea of how frequently you're running tabletop exercises. And that's if you don't know what that is, then certainly email addresses up there. Feel free to email any of those people, and we can give you some ideas on not just how to run a tabletop, but also some scenarios that you might work through.
All right, we are running out of time. Are there any questions? Were there any online questions? No? We're good. One thing that I wanted to add was one thing that you can do for yourselves is to know your state data laws. In Idaho, the data belongs to the elected official. They are the custodians of that data. It's not IT. IT is the tool and the mechanism to help protect that data. So make sure that you know what those are and that the elected officials are responsible for protecting that data.
Yeah, I did want to share something very innovative that New York State is working on. You may be aware, but they're working on the very first joint security operations center. It's going to be the first cybersecurity operations center. It's going to be, it's going to link all of the agencies in New York State, okay, plus New York City, which is a monster in itself, and all 62 counties. That's the long-term vision. And they're looking at first quarter 2023 to get this joint cybersecurity operations center on board. So I'd be interested to hear what other states are doing. Are there any statewide cyber monitoring programs like this? Any show of hands? Anyone else? Yes, please share.
North Dakota has made a large investment in a statewide SOC such as that.
Nice.
We also offer a large amount of statewide antivirus involvement, statewide vulnerability scans for counties, cities, and state. It's worked out quite well. The one downfall from the side of the end users is the control has been centralized at the state level. So in the event you do get a cyber incident or something like that, your immediate IT, be it a county or city, may have to interact with that other third-party agency to see those immediate resolutions. However, it has allowed our smaller counties who may have 1,400 people or citizens there have a full 24/7 SOC at a zero cost to them, which has been a huge benefit for our state.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent.
All right, we are out of time. We're coming up to a break. Want to give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.